You've found the FarrCast, your weekly podcast with conversations from across Wall Street, Washington, and the world. And now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It is the 6th day of March, last month of the first quarter here in 2025. Are you having trouble keeping up, folks? Because I sure am. I listened to the president's address to the nation. I've seen more stuff in 3 days or 4 days this week, I think, than I saw in a month last year. And I thought last year was pretty fact-packed. Okay, let's take a look at markets. And by the way, reporters are calling me almost nonstop. I'm getting 3 calls a day from reporters to do interviews for quotes for this and that. When the markets go crazy, they tend to call the old guy, is what that means. Who's got a lot of experience out there, and they reach out. S&P 500, pretty much where it was at the beginning of the year, if not slightly lower. NASDAQ has corrected a full 10% now, full 10% lower. The 10-year Treasury yield is 429. So we've been in a range. It went a good deal lower there. The yields went lower. It's hanging at that 429. It's not signaling a panic. On the other hand, oil at 66 with a 66 handle. That's what traders will say when the first dollar figure. We care that it's 66.78 or 66.28, but a 66 handle is all you really need to see to know what's going on with oil. It's down, and people are not looking for big expansion in this country or around the world. Now, you get much lower than $66 a barrel, and U.S. manufacturers start stopping production. They begin reducing production because they stop making enough money to haul the stuff out of the ground and refine it. So pay attention. Gold is still over $2,900 an ounce. That's telling you what people are thinking about the dollar. And the dollar has fallen. The dollar has fallen. So as we continue to have these sort of battles of words around the world, President Trump trying to posture, changes in Ukraine, people trying to figure out where the U.S. stands, maybe people in the U.S. trying to figure out where the U.S. stands. Markets try to price everything in. And when bombast, which can be effective in bringing folks to the table, okay? President Trump has been effective in using this bombastic rhetoric and getting folks to the negotiating table. When that becomes policy, as it did this week with tariffs, when bombast becomes policy, Wall Street has to reprice. Wall Street has to recalculate and go, wait a minute, the numbers are changing, therefore I have to change. That's what's happening, folks. The comments out of China this morning were really concerning. So overnight, very early morning hours this morning, China said this: if war is what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. Chinese embassy in the U.S. said in a post on X on Wednesday, signaling an increasingly aggressive stance toward the U.S., and that the fentanyl-related explanation on behalf of the U.S. is a flimsy excuse. Sounds like China is returning the same sort of rhetorical bombast that President Trump is famous for. My father-in-law was an adjunct faculty at Virginia Tech, and he said faculty meetings got so heated because so very little was at stake. He suggested that SALT II treaties and nuclear treaties were conducted, and negotiations were conducted in whispers because the consequences were so grave. Maybe we should be listening to my father-in-law a little bit now and lowering our voices. Well, we've got a lot for you on the FarrCast today as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. We're going to start with Jim Iuorio, and then we're going to get to Dan Mahaffee. I've got a lot to cover, and then we're going to cover the oil markets with Daryl Owen. So going straight to markets, figure out how we're pricing all of this and what the experts like Iuorio are doing. Welcome back to the FarrCast, Jim.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
It's a weird kind of a world we're living in. My Trump supporter friends are still enthusiastic and they're saying, a lot of this stuff, Michael, just needed to happen. And my Democratic friends are going, the world is ending. I want to leave the country. This is horrible. This is shameful. And the list goes on and on. On Wall Street, we have to price this stuff. Whether we agree with either side, it doesn't matter. That's not our job. Our job is to price it and think about where pricing will be in the future, more important. So, what do you think?
So I want to address the China thing too, because I think that's really interesting. But I'm going to talk about the market part of it first, if that's okay with you.
Yes,
So
sir.
the market's obviously been weak. S&P down 6.5% at current levels. So there's three elements when you boil everything away that I think are paramount. One is that the economy is absolutely and completely in decline. Atlanta Fed GDP now has had the biggest drop in 4 years and now is registering a minus 2.8% for GDP, clearly recessionary levels. Now, that would be fine in normal circumstances because the Fed, I mean, for equity prices, because the Fed would come in and throw money at it and that would end up in risk assets. Now you throw in the fact that inflation is persistent and somewhat annoying. The last three prints of CPI, 2.5 to 2.93%, shows that inflation might be accelerating. Now, those two things together smack of stagflation, and the market hates that because then the Fed can't do its normal thing of coming, riding in on the white horse and taking care of things with money. Now, those two things, though, can exist for a short time because the belief, I'm sorry if I'm kind of on a rant.
No, you're doing great.
Okay, good. But those two things can exist and equity markets still stay strong because those two things act as a counterbalance against each other. If demand is declining because of the recession, well, prices can't stay elevated for too long and continue higher. So those things normally balance each other out, although it's an interesting wrinkle compared to just a normal recession. Now you throw in the third exogenous factor, which is the fly in the ointment, which the market is interpreting the tariffs as exacerbating the already moving higher inflation, making it like a no-win situation for the Fed, where they essentially might not even be able to ease as much as we want. So stock market is having to digest those three things, and it is a bad mix. Now, from the near and medium term, and by the way, starting about a month or two ago, I've said that this 2025 was going to be a rocky year. Pulling the Band-Aid off is not an easy thing at all. And anyone who thought it was misleading themselves. So anyway, 5,800 is kind of a line in the sand of the S&Ps. And I go back to technical analysis to feel the momentum and sentiment. If we close the week, but my actual level is 5,808. But if we close the week and the S&P futures below that, so on Friday, March 7th, if we close below that, I think that will be indication of more weakness come down to approximately 5,400 would be a 12% decline in the S&P, which, by the way, the scenario makes that a likely event. I'm not saying it's 100% sure. And it does open the door for a snapback rejection. So it'll be like a critical couple days starting next week. Now I breathe. Okay.
That was pretty good. Okay. So I've talked to a couple economists, Jim, and because I've been confused, and which happens frequently, by the way. But I've been confused. If you have policy-driven inflation, okay, we've seen supply chain disruptions when the supply is lower than the demand and prices go up. We've also seen inflation as a result of monetary policy. Keynes says it's always a monetary event. Well, this is not a monetary event. This is a fiscal policy-driven event. And I can't see any way that the Fed can cure this sort of inflation. They don't have a tool that does that. They can't be lowering rates when prices are going up and things are stalling because the other branch of government is raising prices.
Right.
What we're missing, Jim? I mean, this just seems to be, I'm scratching my head, and they could go up all around the world too.
By the way, you're missing nothing, and the market is agreeing with you 100%. Actually, you missed one thing. You said Keynes when you meant Friedman.
I did mean Friedman, and I thought about it, but you know what? I couldn't think of Friedman. I was like, damn it wasn't Keynes. And I couldn't think
You think I wasn't going to call you out on that, old
Oh
man?
no, I'm so glad you did. I don't want to mislead anybody. I'm just
joking.
old and addled. That's it. We clarify. Yes.
By the way, Michael and I are approximately the same age. That's why I make fun of him being an old.
He's younger. Don't believe it. But I said, Friedman was wrong too, because without demand you don't get inflation. Without demand you don't get inflation. Well, without maybe you do get inflation if all of a sudden the government decides they don't care about inflation, that they're going to have tariffs.
And
Then you get inflation that the government doesn't care about, which again is troublesome because that inflation is going to raise prices of the durable goods, of the consumer non-discretionary goods,
Mhm.
consumer non-discretionary, and those who don't, those stuff that you don't have a lot of discretion buying. People who pay those prices are everybody, but the people at the bottom 50% or bottom 60% of the economy suffer most.
Yep.
So, uh, President Trump, you had a lot of pickup truck driving American good old boys in your corner, and they're going to hurt. How's that going to work out for you, pal?
It's going to be about the messaging and an element of trust. And we've said this on this show, you and me before. Like when we say there's going to be pain, and Donald Trump says there's going to be pain, it's almost awful that people like us say it because we're talking about pain for people who aren't us.
Who aren't us?
And I feel terrible about that, but that's the reality. But if there's trust, and I will add something else too. In Donald Trump's first term, he tweeted about equity markets, I believe it was 60 times in the first 100 days, whether it was up or down. He was trying to talk the stock market up. He doesn't mention it all right now. To me, that is evidence that he understands completely that this transition is going to be inelegant. It is going to be, a bit clumsy and cause this pain that we're talking of, which people who are not us, and I feel bad saying it every time, but I think that we are in the midst of an enormous transition. The market's going to have a difficult time with it, and we need clarity and certainty. And guess what? That's months away. Clarity and certainty for many of these policies. I believe that 2026 is going to be the beneficiary of 2025 rockiness. And by the way, I don't know if you remember a conversation we had the first half of December where I came on the show and I talk about one of my favorite things to talk about is rebalancing. After 2 years of 25,
Yes.
30%, I said on this show that I sold about 20 to 25% of my total equity holdings, probably about 20%. At the time, I was a bull. But it's what discretion is the better part of valor with long-term investing. This is for me. I'm not
Oh, I
giving
think
any advice.
discipline is the better part of valor because that's really what you're talking about. You followed your
Amen.
discipline.
Yes. Discipline. And discipline sometimes means selling when you're still a bull. And it sometimes means adding your hedges when you're still a bull. Well, I'm not a bull now, but I had those hedges on. So I'm sleeping pretty well. And I'm not giving myself an attaboy. I'm just saying that
Well,
yeah.
you can give yourself an attaboy. Somebody's got to, Uriel. I mean, who the hell else is going to do it? So I will actually, but I'll give it to both of us. I'll jump on the attaboy bus because this is what we do. When we tell you that no, just because yields are low, you don't just sell all your fixed income. You don't do that. You have an asset allocation that's based on your risk profile, and you stick with that no matter what the outside noise happens to be generating. That's the whole point. Be disciplined in what we're doing. Jim's suggesting an opportunity coming up. Did you hear opportunity or did you get scared?
No,
Because the good investors there heard opportunity. When he said, because what he's talking about is you've got a very delicate, precarious place for the S&P 500 now, and we got a jobs number coming out on Friday, and nobody thinks that number is going to be very good. And that's tomorrow, folks. So could we get that close and could we see that next 10% downside? You bet your sweet bippy, as we used to say on Laugh In. Jim, give us a final word. This has been great, but we're way out of time. We got to go.
good. I like what you said about opportunity. I've already started to take off some of my hedges, leaving myself more long. I did that at about down 5 to down 6%. I'm planning on doing it again at down 10% and again at down 12%, which I think is probably where we're going, dependent on that close on Friday. I still like the commodity sector. Gold, obviously gold has been the best performer. Well, that's probably not exactly true, but good enough. And I like things like that because of the uncertainty. Make sense?
Anytime you can find a greater foothold and a little more certainty during more volatile times, everybody sleeps better at night. Remember, everybody out there, Warren Buffett is not starting to panic. Warren Buffett is licking his lips. He's got a lot of cash, and he's going, I just can't wait till it comes my way. What was the movie, Changing Places? Just
Trading places. Yeah.
Trading Places. There, that's twice. I'm missing my economists and my movies today. Trading Places. That great scene when they're on the Philadelphia floor, commodities floor, and they sit there and go, not yet, not yet, not yet. And then they look up and say, Now.
I
Now.
love that.
That's
Yes.
that's when I tell you of that whole movie. That's when Iuorio and I and guys like us are going, yes, yes,
Yes.
that was the most
Goosebumps.
exciting part of the movie because
No
we
doubt
know
about
what's
it.
going on.
I
That's when
love
they're
that.
making their money. They're covering their shorts. It was awesome.
It was
Awesome.
awesome.
All right.
Amen.
Jim Iuorio, partner at TJM Institutional Services in Chicago, our great friend and one of the smartest guys we talk to. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with Mahaffee, China, Ukraine. We've stopped sharing intelligence with them. When we come back on the FarrCast, please stay with us.
Thanks for being with us this week. Now it's time to go to our political analyst, Dan Mahaffee, and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back. Joining me now, as he does every week, Dan Mahaffee, president of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, scholar at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, a Washington, D.C. think tank, and the senior political analyst on the FarrCast, now in season 8. Welcome back, Dan. Happy March.
Yeah, farewell to February. Good morning, Michael, and good to be talking with you as always.
Farewell to February. Farewell to Arms was the title of that book that we used to teach, I guess, years ago to high school. Maybe, I don't know if it's been banned yet or not. Maybe it'd have to go to the list. One of those communist things like Catcher in the Rye. Dan, the Chinese and the Chinese embassy this morning had a pretty strong quotation. I read it earlier. If war's what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. That came out of the Chinese embassy in the U.S. And that fentanyl-related explanation is a flimsy excuse for all of this. Give us your impressions as to what this means, and in conjunction with the U.S. decision to stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine. Pick one and start, please.
Well, look, we'll start with China. We've had many good discussions about the U.S.-China relationship on this show, and I think we can harken back to, if Harry could pull the archives back to the first Trump term, where we were talking about how many of these things became wars of rhetoric between the Trump administration and Chinese officials, particularly as they tried to work, as we remember then, to that track one trade deal and what was seen as the big old grand deal with China before COVID really blew the doors off the relationship there.
That seemed to have, okay, but when I hearken back even then, it seems a gentler time with the veneer of civility that seems to have vanished and been stripped away.
No, it's easy
my
to forget.
veneer, I was going with the veneer and stripped away and all of that. Okay, go ahead.
Look, I think the Chinese, we remember then when they went wolf warrior. That was the term. They got very strident, started to lash out against smaller countries too, and it really alienated a lot of folks, even though in China...
And that's been 20 years, Dan, that rhetoric's increased.
Well, it's been gradually increasing, but it really did in intensity during the Trump administration, the first term, really trying to get, again, that nationalist element at home on board at a time when they felt the country was under assault by the United States. Now that's happening again, but we also see China has learned from that. Are they going to be doing softer rhetoric, given that they want to portray themselves as the ones holding up or maintaining international commercial relationships, things like rules-based order, a lot of that stuff you used to hear coming out of Washington, that Beijing will now say they're the ones upholding, and that other countries can rely on China more than they can the United States. That's the overseas message. The other one is, do we see China, because of this trade war, by hook or by crook, Xi finally having to unleash some of the stimulus packages, the capitalist measures? We saw him just last week meeting with some of the tech executives who had so long been kept under the boot of the party, as it were. So is he now reforming or opening up the economy in response and giving some of that consumer stimulus, as well as backing the real estate market there? Because he understands they have to have a strong economy for this confrontation with the U.S.
It seems, I mean, we are seeing that this morning, right? That China has said that they will increase monetary accommodations in order to support their economy and to take on this trade war and everything else. So it looks like they're willing to increase their indebtedness because their economic strength isn't there. So they're going to move into the U.S. posture of taking on more debt, having more stimulus, making sure their economy keeps growing, well, at least on the
Yeah.
surface, while their national debt continues to grow.
Or mainly
Money
keeping,
has to come from
and
somewhere.
I think for Xi, damn the metrics, that he maintains the economic growth and standard of living that allow the Chinese to give up their personal liberties. That's always been the bargain, and whether he continued to uphold that will be the future of his rule. On the other hand, as we talk about Ukraine, the cutoff of intelligence sharing, that issue, I think it actually, even though another side of the world, it ties into that same thread of U.S. leadership and the U.S. role in the world. And be it Trump's rhetoric, be it hostile, unpredictable, irreverent, no matter what, the world is now looking for ways to move on beyond the United States and without the United States because of these actions.
And
And you
that's
see
just
that
fine with Donald Trump, right?
that's certainly fine with Donald Trump. That's certainly fine with the America First element. But what it does undo is a lot of the institutions that were built by your father, my grandfather's generation, knowing that the last time we did this and turned our back in the world, things really went bad, and we had to send a lot of our young men to die overseas to fix it.
And here's part of the part that is hard for me to get my head around. President Trump wants to protect the competitiveness of U.S. companies, which will support job growth in the U.S. He wants to support the restoration of U.S. manufacturing, which has been in decline because of China's inclusion in the World Trade Organization. He wants to encourage U.S. and foreign companies to move more of their production to the U.S. and force countries that engage in unfair trade practices to clean up their act, force NATO allies to pay more, but bringing this manufacturing back to the U.S. And not taking advantage of cheaper prices around the world does two things. One, we've got 4% unemployment. That's full employment by any economist's measure. We have full employment in the U.S., and he wants to add more jobs. Now, if nobody's looking for a job and we have full employment, why do you need more jobs? And if you add more jobs, there's going to be more competition for employees, and that drives wage prices higher, creating and resulting in wage inflation, number one. Number two, if you bring manufacturing back here that had been done less expensively around the world, prices here go up. Prices here go up at Walmart and Kmart and everywhere else. So economically, you always source the most efficient use and expense of your currency. And this isn't it. It's a feel good that's very expensive. And I frankly, I just don't get it. It doesn't make economic sense. I'm not making a political comment, ladies and gentlemen. Don't throw rocks through my windows. If you can tell me how this math makes sense and isn't inflationary and how it will not raise prices for 2/3 of our fellow Americans who are economically weaker, if you and it doesn't and puts them in a harder, tougher, worse position, and they're going to suffer more. If you can explain it to me, explain it to me. But I don't see it. So, Dan, please explain to me what I'm missing.
You're right on the math, but the response would be the voters think I'm right anyway.
Great. I'm right on the math, but you have sentiment. This is a Xi Jinping argument of I have an ideal and damn the economy. Why isn't it the same? Am I drawing the wrong analogy?
Well, look, I think what you have are, and this is a discussion I've seen elsewhere, but it's the where do you, and this was I think a Nomura analysis note from their team, is the administration actually trying to engineer a recession? Looking at the rhetoric of Secretary of
Wait,
Treasury
wait, wait.
Bessent.
Is the administration trying to engineer a recession, bring about a recession?
Yes, and this is and it's in O'Meara's note, and I think as we talk about the math and these policies and the rhetoric, it's a question worth asking.
Okay,
What
explain why the administration would want to start a recession.
The note is that one, that they want to rebalance again, that it makes it easier to bring in the tariff hit, getting the manufacturing on board, as well as addressing the government spending, debt, interest rates. A recession will force the Fed to cut rates. It'll slow the economy at the time these tariffs are coming in, and that'll have an effect as well. But it'll bring down inflation, and then by time that their supply side, be it legislation as well as unleashing energy, will be able to then have the economy pick up and be, as they see, more of a real economy and less one reliant on government spending and artificial programs to prop it up. So, and in a way too, they see making the dollar weaker, making American manufacturing more competitive. All these factors that they see as key to what they want, and you see it in the Secretary of Treasury's remarks, where he
Wait.
talks
Okay, so
repeatedly
first,
about the economy needs to be reoriented towards Main Street and small rural America.
I'm absolutely confused. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but to get that balance right, I mean, to actually make all of those moving parts fit with inflation, prices, currency, global markets, you're playing Russian roulettes with 5 bullets in the gun. 5 bullets in the gun, Russian roulette is what that suggestion is. Do you disagree with that? Do you want? I mean, you want?
No, it's incredibly dangerous, and it's not even the concept of a soft landing. It's purposefully a hard landing with no landing gear and no seatbelt.
Yeah, everybody dies in most of those scenarios. Everybody dies in most of those scenarios. The hard landing without landing gear, we've seen that. It's not good. It's not good. So, Dan, that can't be what's going on. And I've still got to go to Ukraine, and we're out of time. Oh my God. So, Dan, how much of this is rhetoric? How much of it gets backed off? And when God, it's only been 2 months of this new administration, and progress is being made. The president has made some progress and some important progress in certain areas, not only that just feel good to his constituency, but I think are good for America in certain areas. I got to be balanced about this, but there's some of this that worries the hell out of me and actually scares me. So when does he back off? Does he figure out that
Yeah.
Wall Street's not voting for him and make changes?
Well, yeah, that's now what is it? Where is the Trump put? And at what point, though, if you do arrest this, does it require a significant, if not wholesale, 180 on policies near and dear to his heart? So that's where I don't see the reversal. And I also see that the theme of the second term, based on lessons from the first term, was no more Mattis's, no more McMasters, no more Kellys. They want people who will be on board with the president's vision and ideas. And as you see more of this rhetoric of short-term pain being necessary, I think they are more willing to play these, as we say, dangerous games with trying to engineer this economic outcome.
It's high stakes. This is ridiculously high stakes poker. In Farr's opinion, I do not think the proposed benefits anywhere justify this risk. Get to me what's going on with Ukraine, and we got to go. And we haven't even touched the debt ceiling. I can't believe it, but too much to do, and we'll do it next week.
Well, yeah, we'll do it next week because the solution will finally be coming into shape just hours before the debt limit ceiling. But with Ukraine, I think
No, it won't. Go ahead.
with Ukraine, the matter will be that the Europeans are going to have to step up now. The animus between the Trump administration and Kyiv, particularly Zelensky, the desire to really push and show the Russians how serious they are about a peace deal. Look, as we've talked about, is it a gambit to show how unreasonable Putin is early on if these are not met with some kind of conciliation? Sure, but look, across the board, be it slowing down our cyber offensives against Russia, to the fact that we have FBI agents in the Washington field office complaining they've been taken off Russian counterintelligence to help round up immigrants. All of these things just tell a story of policy that if you want to look at our posture towards Russia, you also have questions there of is this really a goal to get some kind of deal with Moscow, or what is the purpose of this weakening of our posture?
Dan Mahaffee, senior political analyst on the FarrCast. Thank you, pal. Coming up, Daryl Owen, a Washington's insider on the oil and energy markets, when we come back on the FarrCast. Please stay with us.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. Thank you for joining us on the FarrCast. And now, back to your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Remember, each week we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. I think that our appearances today by Jim Iuorio and Dan Mahaffee were two of their strongest appearances ever, and that's in 8 years. Hope you agreed. I hope that was helpful. I found it fascinating, exciting, and I think it's only going to get better for segment 3 here with my friend Daryl Owen. Daryl is a Washington, D.C. lobbyist, but boy, he's an insider's insider. He was in the office of Senator Bennett Johnson, the AA, number one dude in that office for quite a while, ran the House Energy Committee, Senate Energy Committee. Senate Energy Committee, sorry, is with the firm of Owen, Evans, and Ingalls, and he's the man in D.C., energy policy. So, Daryl, welcome back. We always get such great feedback when you're on. People really like to hear from you, so thank you for joining us again.
Always a pleasure to be here, Michael. Thank you.
We're glad you're here. Daryl, tariffs and energy. Tell us what's going on. You know, we saw this statement from the Chinese embassy this morning that basically said if the United States wants war, we'll go to war. And it seemed to me that China is returning Trump bombastic rhetoric with bombastic rhetoric. Bombastic rhetoric doesn't seem to be good in high-stakes poker, as far as I'm concerned. I've described that in earlier segments of the FarrCast. Tell us what you make of all of this as a lifetime, pretty much, denizen of Capitol Hill.
It's a little baffling, Michael. It's hard to fathom what the president's motivation is on tariffs. Is it the raising of revenue? In which case, it's likely to be modestly successful, but at the expense of the American consumer. Is it to control immigration and fentanyl coming into the borders? Perhaps. Is it genuinely motivated by the trade practices of other countries vis-a-vis the U.S.? It could be, but it's never been clearly stated. The process with which it is being implemented is erratic at best and unexplained almost universally. So it's a little hard to tell, but when you see the reactions of countries like China and even Canada, this is a lot different than 8 years ago. No one knew what to make of Trump 8 years ago. Trade issues had not really been addressed in some significant period of time. And it was fairly easy to accommodate the president, and the U.S., Canada, Mexico Free Trade Agreement is an example. It was an upgrade of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Very modest changes, but enough to make the president happy. The reaction of countries this time is far more bellicose. It's like, oh yeah, you want to tax, you want to tariff us, we'll tariff you. And just look at Trudeau in Canada, at some of the rhetoric that has come out of him. You're a smart man, but this is a stupid idea. You didn't hear that 8 years ago.
No.
And I think the reaction of the world this time is far, far more troublesome from the standpoint of U.S. economic and national security than it was in the first term.
Let's go there for a second. Economic and national security. How is that become a more dangerous place, do you think?
Well, just look at energy. We get somewhere between 3 and 4 million barrels a day of oil from Canada, depending on season. What happens if that goes away? What happens if the price of that goes up significantly? What does that do to the U.S.? It certainly disrupts the economy. We like to beat our breast about energy security. That's a complete misnomer.
Let me throw you back in your days on Capitol Hill, and all of a sudden I'm going to tell you, Mr. Chairman, that Canada has just stopped oil flow delivery to the sales to the United States. What do you do? What do you do? What does that mean for you? What does that mean for the government in that moment?
Great question, and it's hard to know, and I don't know that it has ever been seriously evaluated. We still have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, although for political purposes, Biden ran that down from a fairly robust amount of storage to something that's far more modest. Replacing 3 to 4 million barrels a day of oil coming into this country, is a monumental challenge. You don't have the refining capacity to refine a lot of the oil that we would get in. People generally don't understand that oil is not the same every place. Some oil is very heavy. It's more like asphalt. Other is lighter, more like gasoline. Some has sulfur, some doesn't. It's known as sweet and sour. Refineries are configured very specifically for a feedstock of oil to which they have some long-term guarantee. If you disrupt that, let's say you now have access to a lot more feedstock, but if it's not the right kind of feedstock, you can't refine it and get it into the system.
Feedstock.
Feedstock is the oil that goes into a refinery.
Feedstock, F-E-E-D, feedstock.
Stock.
Okay,
Yes.
fine. Thank you. Is the oil that goes into a refinery. Thank you. Okay.
But let's say you can replace the oil. If it's not the right kind of oil, you still can't refine it.
Yep.
And it's not apparent to me that anyone in the administration is taking any of that into account. If Canada really wants to strike back, Canada could say, okay, no more Canadian oil, no more Canadian softwood lumber, no more Canadian car parts. How long is the United States seriously ready to withstand that? You would see gasoline prices double overnight.
There was a report out of Nomura Securities suggesting that this was an effort and designed on behalf of the administration to cause a short-term and sharp recession very quickly in the U.S., to which the Fed could come riding on a white horse with lower rates, begin a recovery after we had made big points on the trade balance, and then have a recovery and surging economy in time for the midterm elections. My response was, that's like playing Russian roulette with 5 bullets in the gun. One of the dumbest things I've ever heard if they really want to try to do that. But can you think of another ultimate point? I mean, what really are we trying to accomplish here? What does the president really want to get done, Daryl, in all of these policies with tariffs and everything else? Because there isn't any way that you see them that doesn't make prices here go higher, and the people who have to pay them is pretty much everybody, because these are non-discretionary goods, prices going up, and that nails the bottom 2/3 of the U.S. population, voter, citizen, consumer, however you want to call them. People who are not wealthy still have to pay higher prices for all those things with money they don't have.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Michael. And as I said at the outset, it's not clear what the president's motivation is in doing this. If at my ripe old age, I've just become cynical enough to believe he doesn't give a damn what the implications of this are. He wants to show the American people that he's doing stuff for the United States. And he can portray all of these tariffs is, I'm bashing China, I'm bashing people who've been taking advantage of us. Notwithstanding our status in the world, we apparently have been taken advantage of for generations. I somehow missed that. But it's an effort to show the American people that, by God, I'm in charge and I'm doing stuff for you. And the consequences of that could be very profound. They could be catastrophic.
Why aren't we hearing from Republican senators? Why aren't we hearing something from Democratic senators other than this guy's a jerk? This guy's a jerk, Senator, doesn't help. What have you got that's going to help, Senator?
I have been astonished. I mean, this is not incidental stuff.
I was told by a CEO of an energy company, a guy you and I know, and were discussing earlier, who was at Davos. And he was in the room when President Trump came on the screen to address the group at Davos. And I said, tell me what the mood was. What was the reaction in the room? We saw the TV stuff, but what was it and what was it afterwards? And he said, it was funny. People were a bit sort of like, there he goes again. But nobody sort of spoke up as loudly as they did 4 or 5 years ago when he said many of the same things. And there seemed to be a feeling among all of those world leaders present that nobody wanted to really attract his ire. Nobody wanted to come into the Trump crosshairs, and therefore everybody was a little bit quiet. That seems to be what's happening on Capitol Hill, Daryl. And okay, maybe it can happen on Capitol Hill until the polls start going against Trump, and then those senators start speaking up. But on a world scale, on the world stage, are those world leaders, basically what you just said, are they beginning to fight back? Are they beginning to find a voice? And will they mean it? And will they put their wallets and tariffs where their mouths are? Or are they still scared of him?
To some degree, they have to be scared of the United States, just given our position in the world. But as I said, I think the response this time is dramatically different than it was before. And I think, regardless of how it turns out, lasting damage is being done. And I completely agree with you. I really could never have envisioned the reaction that we're seeing on all sides right now.
When you look at some of the arguments right now that we're having with Canada and Mexico and China, when you look at our trading partners, this is a couple of years old, but basically, Mexico and Canada are 15% each of U.S. trade. Each of U.S. trade. On both of our borders, we have 30% of all of U.S. trade. China represents about another 14%, almost equal to both of those. So now you've got over 45%, somewhere in there, of U.S. trade those are the three countries in the hot seat. This doesn't go without consequence. Tell us, Daryl, how you think this plays out for energy. Why, in all of this with tariffs and everything, are we seeing the price per barrel with a $66 handle? Why isn't it $90 if all of a sudden these threats are real?
Fair question. I think the supply-demand lines are targeted at each other, but it's 2 to 3 years out. Economic growth worldwide is going to require more oil than we are likely to be able to produce, but we're not there yet. And you're having a little softness in the global economy. The Chinese economy is soft. The European economy is soft. And the growth in demand, not demand, but growth in demand is slowing. And you're seeing Middle Eastern oil come back on the market. You've seen Iranian oil come back on the market. The U.S. is producing at record levels, although not at the same levels that we consume. And that's a misconception. So you're seeing what I believe to be a temporary surfeit of oil on the global market right now, and prices are soft. But eventually those lines are going to cross.
Okay, if we get 3 to 4 million barrels a day from Canada, how much other oil do we import that we need every day?
Harry asked me that earlier, and it's a great question. I don't have a precise answer, but here are the round figures. We produce a little over 13 million barrels a day. We use about 19 million barrels a day. That delta has to be imported. In addition to that, the qualities of some of the crude that we produce don't match up with our refining capacity. That's the early conversation that we had. So we export certain amounts of crude that we produce here domestically. That too has to be offset by imported oil. And so if I had to guess, Michael, I would say, and this is just ballpark, we probably import about 9 million barrels a day and export about 3 to 4.
And export 3 to 4. Okay, 3 to 4. Who to whom do we export that 3 to 4? Who has that refining capacity? Who buys our oil?
I think Europe buys a fair amount of it. China buys some, although long term that could be in doubt. The Pacific Rim has become a growing market for U.S. exports, both LNG and oil. There are a lot of LNG projects on the drawing board. There's a number of oil export projects on the board. No one knows what all these tariffs are going to do to that, or the geopolitical tensions that could derive from all of that. But generally, the larger economies, Pacific Rim and Europe.
I've got to run, Daryl. This has been great. Does the government shut down with this debt ceiling thing? I've got about 10 seconds. Sorry.
I don't see how they avoid it.
And do they stay shut down for how long?
I don't know. I mean, I think we were about 40 days last time Trump did this. The problem that they've got is that they're going to have Democrats to avoid a shutdown. The Democrats right now are bristling over the fact that Trump is not spending money that's already been directed to be spent by the Congress. That's one of the constitutional challenges that's being put on the table. They're not inclined to cooperate with the Republicans, whose vote the Republicans need their votes. They're not inclined to cooperate because Trump's not spending money that's already been appropriated. So what certainty do they have that by taking this step that they're going to satisfy what needs to be done? They think Trump will just undo it.
Daryl Owen is the founder of Owen, Evans, and Ingalls, a Washington, D.C. Government relations firm, which is code for lobbying firm. And if you need to get something done in D.C., when I tell you this is the guy you call this guy. Thank you, Daryl, very, very much. I always learn so much. Thank you.
Always great to be with you, Michael. Thank you.
That's it for another FarrCast, ladies and gentlemen. As we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world, I don't think I was wrong. Daryl did not let us down in segment 3. One of our better FarrCasts, I think, Harry. I really do. When I learn a lot and I want to keep asking more questions and just run out of time, that's always a good sign. So we'll be back again next week. We'll do it all again. We hope you learned today. I certainly did. For everybody at Hightower, Farr Miller in Washington, my producer, Harry Jennings, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Please share us on your social media. By the way, the market commentary this week, I think it's awfully informative. H. Jennings at farrmiller.com. He'll send you a copy for free. But boy, we cover a lot of these topics in great detail. In Naples, Florida, I'm grateful to each of you. Thanks so much. I'm Michael Farr. I'll see you next week.
And that's a wrap on this week's episode of the FarrCast. Thanks to our guest, Jim Iuorio, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Daryl Owen. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Please be aware that any time we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it is not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And if we can be of assistance here at Farr Miller in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with one of our investment professionals to help you navigate your financial course. We are grateful for all of your notes and comments, and we try to respond to as many as we can. Please keep the emails and messages coming. Join us in coming weeks as our schedule includes special guests Dr. Jay Bryson from Wells Fargo, Joshua Huminski from the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, and Dr. Jeff Lacker, former president of the Richmond Federal Reserve, and others from across the world, bringing you insight into the evolving political, economic, and investing landscape. Until next week, take care, stay safe, stay healthy. It's the FarrCast, Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, and SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.